Good morning, everyone. Please join me in welcoming Seth Rogen, Paul Dano, Mr. Steven Spielberg, Gabriel LaBelle, Mr. Judd Hirsch, and Tony Kushner. Welcome to this press conference for the Fabelmans. We're very excited to have you here and to have your film premiering here at the festival. Stephen, thank you so much for bringing it to Toronto. This is your most personal film yet, and it's not just a love letter to movies, but I think to the power of movies, how they can shape our lives, our experiences, how they can illuminate things around us, literally in the case of young Sammy. Can you talk a little bit about making a film that is this personal, telling this story now, and about what that power of movies in your life has meant to you?
Well, I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it turned out to be, because I know the material, and I know all the characters for my entire life, and yet I found this to be, for me, a very daunting experience, because I was attempting in a semi-autobiographical way to recreate huge recollections, not only in my life, but in the lives of my three sisters and my mother and father, who were no longer with us. And just the responsibility of that began to, build. When Tony and I sat down when we decided that this was something, I decided that I needed to do this, and Tony was certainly my therapeutic counselor in getting this out of me. And as we started working on this, I realized that this was going to, there was no aesthetic distance between me and the experience. I wasn't going to be able to put a camera the way Sammy's able to put a camera between himself and horribly realistic things that are happening to him. And I've always been able to put a camera between myself and reality just to protect myself. And I couldn't do it telling the story. And as Paul knows and the cast knows, this was emotionally a very difficult experience. Not all of it, but some of it was really, really hard to get through.
Tony, I want to ask you about that process of acting as a kind of a surrogate therapist for Stephen. What were the conversations like as you were drawing out those pivotal moments in young Sammy's life to make it into the screenplay?
I didn't know. I should have charged by the hour. I didn't feel like it was therapy. I mean, it was. We've been working together now for 20 years. I just want to take issue with one thing that Stephen just said. I don't think that he actually does keep the camera between himself and real life in any of his movies. I think that the thing that makes him who he is and makes those movies as great as they are is that there's an emotional depth and power in everything he does. They're not giant sort of soulless entertainment contraptions. They're even the most, wildly popular of his movies have moments of real pathos and depth and complexity. And so I think that it's interesting that you said that, because that was the dialectic that sort of emerged as we talked about these early memories, is that, you find a way into the world as a kid that will make you feel at least somewhat safe, if you're lucky, and then the thing that makes you feel safe is guaranteed if it's really something of value, if it's a process, an instrument, a tool that can really help you. It's also going to lead you back to the truth, which is the world is not safe. We're all mortal. You lose things, loss is a part of existence, and danger is a part of existence, and risk. And so, that experience, I just found that, thinking about Stephen's life, and as we talked about it, just an incredibly moving thread through the whole thing. And we had a blast. I mean, I hate writing, and
You hate writing?
It's like, I do. It's like the worst thing. It's so miserable because you're alone in the room with your awful self and your stupid head. But we were on this Zoom 3 days a week, 4 hours a day, just sort of playing around and saying, what if he says this? What if he says that? What is it? And it was, and it just kept coming and coming, and it was great. I loved it. Now I have to go back to doing it by myself, and I hate it even more because it's like, where is he? Where's Steve? So,
Yeah. when the whole writing process was over, I breathed a great sigh of relief, and I said to myself, "Great, now I don't have to write that book."
Even better. Can you talk a little bit, Stephen, about casting Gabriel LaBelle in the role of Sammy, a breakout performance in the film? Congratulations. And then I want to hear from Gabriel as well.
Thank you very much.
Well, you know, I wanted to get somebody really good looking and sexy. And from Canada. Because Sammy's from Vancouver. And you know, it's once again, none of this is really easy because you know, we don't often see ourselves the way our friends and our family sees us. And as a kid growing up, I always had a lot of, you know, reasons why I was always in a corner, or I was always not in the center of a conversation, why I was always on the periphery of people laughing and engaging with each other. There was something shy, I guess, but it was also something insecure as I was growing up. And I needed to find someone that wasn't going to bring, you know, too much self-awareness to Sammy, or at least be able to perform well enough to convince you that there wasn't that self-awareness, because Sammy has quite an arc. And I certainly, not on Zoom, but I, you know, considered a lot of different young actors. And then Sidney Tolan, I have to give her credit. When Sidney Tolan came along, and she had cast a wide net, she had also done West Side Story for us. And when Sidney Tolan came along and had sent the pages to Gabriel, and Gabriel did a reading, and right, you did
I hope so.
It was a reading. It was a good reading. I think that's what it was. And the reason I'm not quite sure what it was because the lines that Tony and I had written for the sides. Actually, Tony had written all the sides himself based on the script. Gabriel added a lot that wasn't on the paper. And in other words, he was infusing it with, I think, his own sense of being. And I got a really good sense of his authenticity. I said, "Oh, this actor's real. This actor understands, you know, how to speak someone else's words, but make it feel like he's making the words up as he talks." And I was so impressed by you. And then, of course, we met and we did a test scene right between you and Chloe East, who plays Monica, over Zoom, and we did test scene live over Zoom, and that was the convincer. I mean, he was, by the way, by then he already had the part.
Thank you. And Gabriel, what was it like for you?
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. I mean, it's just
yeah, you owe me.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what I don't want you to be like when Francis shot Godfather, and he brought Marlon Brando out of retirement, or at least not getting jobs. Then he asked him to do Apocalypse Now, and he said no 10 times, and they paid him a lot of money. Remember that story when I come to you, and I ask you to do a film for me, and you can't pull a Brando on me, okay? Okay, that's all I want to say.
Thank you for everything. That was some very kind words, and putting me in your movie was amazing. Playing Stephen was wild. I mean, at the beginning, we zoomed over. I mean, I only had about like a month before we started shooting, and so we just zoomed a lot. And I asked him a lot of questions about his life in the movie, and to just get a sense of who he is as a person. And I was very surprised at how much of a person you were. There's this. You're growing up in just not in the industry or not in that pocket of the industry. There's this pedestal, and I was very delighted and glad that you're just like a kind and good person. But
instead of an icon.
Yeah, and but it was wild, and it's nerve-wracking, obviously, but it was just a really rewarding experience. I was able, Tony's incredible script, which is perfect, and reading that and anticipating the work that I'll have to do and getting to set not sure of it and leaving feeling accomplished and being around these people, it's the greatest feeling of all. And it's such an education. And you realize that Stephen, Tony, Christy, and Janish, that they're just these friends with a camera making a movie, and no matter who they are, anybody who makes a movie is just that. Yeah. And that was really inspiring. And to see the amount of work that Paul and Michelle and everyone else did, and to be at this pedestal that people seem to have put them on, and how much work it takes to get there.
Right. That must have been very, very kind of gratifying to see them all humanized, people that you'd looked up to.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. I want to hear from the other actors on stage here. Michelle Williams could not make it. She's 9 months pregnant. She was at the premiere last night, but she is due any day. So she's not with us this morning, but I'd love to hear from Seth and Paul and Judd especially in terms of entering this very personal story of Stephen's and the characters that you play, who were based on people that he knew and grew up with, and what that was like to try to bring your own elements to a performance of a character that he knew so well. Paul, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm still processing that Stephen would ask me, this guy named Paul, to play his father, and I too, we started the press conference talking about sort of the emotional element and the challenge for you, Stephen, and I found Bert to actually be quite a heavy cloak to bear. There was really something at work. We filmed a lot of it on a soundstage, and I really felt that there was some kind of spell there in the dark, and I think a lot of that came from Stephen's vulnerability and his openness. And seeing someone like him put himself out there in that way, and what that asks and allows you then to do yourself. And I could feel that, I think, amongst the entire crew. The stakes felt high in a really good way. And I think it was inspiring to see, an artist push themselves yet again by putting themselves out there in this sort of naked of a way. And I think that ultimately is a real gift. Ultimately, there was Arnold, Stephen's father. There was Bert, the character, and there's me. And then there, I don't know, that's...
Some kind of intersection.
Somehow, I think it was about embodying a life that was lived and capturing the essence of a human being. I think Stephen welcomed our own spirits along with us trying to capture his parents. One of the more interesting, profound filming experiences, just to sort of all have us bearing that weight together and sort of sharing those emotions. And luckily, a lot of us were wearing masks, so you couldn't see our sniffles, but they were there. Really, really singular experience.
Seth, your character is the catalyst for some of the most painful parts of the story, and that requires, I think, a certain kind of nuance in playing this role. I wonder what you were bringing to that, and what your conversations with Stephen were like in creating the character.
I asked a lot of questions, and Stephen was very open and gracious. And Bernie, the guy that Uncle Benny is based on, I had the honor of meeting Steven's whole family, and whenever you mention him, everyone's face kind of would light up, and they're like, "Oh, we loved him. We loved Bernie. He was so funny, so charming. Everyone loved him. He walked in a room, everyone would laugh at him." And I'm like, "Okay, that's the guy I gotta be." Everyone loves him. Great. Okay, charming, funny. It's something that. When that is what is necessary narratively, it's a lot of. It was a lot of pressure, to seem effortlessly like someone who, you could imagine why this woman would be in love with, and that as the audience they could get on board with her being in love with him and understand why she loved him, and what kind of man is that you don't necessarily hate in this situation, but you actually fully understand the conflict at play, and there's so many layers to it. And I did find myself just asking a lot of very personal questions about how he was interpreting the situation, what he thought various people knew at various times, and the various. I mean, for me, it was helpful to really try to drill down on literally, like, who knows what's happening here? Who knows what's happening here? There would be a lot of self-awareness at play if you were someone who was in, Bernie or Benny's position, caring deeply for all these people so much, and having your emotions kind of telling you that you are destroying a thing that you love as well. And so that was. Yeah, it's as Paul said, it was something, honestly, I just wanted to look over at him and see on his face that he thought I was doing a good job in a moment-to-moment basis, and to provide him with what he felt he needed to make his film. And when someone is as amazing as Stephen casts you, it's a lot of pressure in some ways, but it's an alleviation of pressure in others, because you're like, he's a master. Like, he knows what he's doing. He knows what I can do. He wouldn't cast me if he didn't think I could do this. And so you just have to perform to the best of your abilities and try to shed all the neuroses that a man like me is essentially driven by. So,
thank you. Judd, I want to ask you, you've got some terrific moments with young Sammy, your character, in the film. These are really such memorable scenes that you have. And I want to ask you about bringing to life this character, particularly because he so represents for the young Sammy just the strength, the power, the resilience of the Jewish culture and community in the family. And I think those are just wonderful scenes with drama and comedy. How did you build those with Stephen and then also with Gabriel?
Well, first of all, I was very happy that Stephen didn't write me as an alien. I know in the back of his head, I'm one of those guys that comes from another place, an unexplainable place. But when you think about it in terms of the history or the years that were different, a man like me, and as I said, as an actor, I would have to go to a place that I didn't even live, except that I could have the feelings about why it forced me to become an actor, which is what the character's made of. That's the only indication that I ever had when I was to do the part. When I read it, I knew Tony had written it, and I thought, oh crap, here I do. One of the great American playwrights of our time has written a part, and he's going to actually say, can you do this? You know who this guy is? No, I don't. I really don't. And then I thought, okay, well, what is the experience? The experience is something forced the man from a very early time, or I should say early enough, to force himself because he had a gestalt, something about he had to become a performer, an artist of some sort. He calls it art, and that's the real word for it. To have this in you and be in a family that cannot recognize it because they have no history for it. It's not in the DNA of the family. You then become this thing that has to be squeezed out, and nobody's going to understand it. Well, why in the world? You have to make a living. If you go back to the 1920s and the early part of the century, you have to understand that it's unlike now.
we could have done a modernized version of why I would tell my great uncle, my great nephew, that he has to be a director, but we can't do it in a modernized way because it has to do it from my experience. In my experience, Stephen never told me what my experience was. I mean, when we did the part, I said, so who is this guy? He said, you do what you want. And what? No, I can't. But anyway, the unexplainable part about the past led me to make up something that had to do very personally with something that happened to me. So what really happened to me was I was going to be an engineer. I studied. I was only a school person. I did not come from a family of inspiration. In fact, it's the opposite. Nobody was truly interested in what made me tick or be happy or want something, you know? The desires at the time of my youth were you succeed, get a job, save yourself, and don't bother us if it's your mother and father, and don't bother us anymore. So I thought back, okay, let me think. What was art to me? I was in my first show, off-Broadway, and I was foolish enough to invite my parents. They had never seen me before. And I was like, we've never had a discussion about plays, acting, the theater, books, or anything, ever. So my father walks in the room, and I said, so what do you think? He said, did you get your snow tires yet? That was my father's. After that, there was nothing more to talk about because it was wintertime, and he was worried about the fact that I had a car, and I drove in New York, and whether I would have the right snow tires on my car. So with that experience, I realized there were thousands of us walking around in the nowhere families, or the families that are really not known for any history of the theater, of art, and how they got out. Why were they individual? I mean, there was no background for them. So that's how I thought, I can make what Tony wrote only by telling you how important it was and what a suffering it is to have to do what is being pushed from my heart by something. And that's what I had to do with him. That's the only thing I could recognize until I realized all of a sudden that I'm telling him how difficult things are going to be, and he's going to die, and that it's going to be so bad to him to do, but he has to do it. So it was like there's two things going on at the same time. Now, I didn't ask you guys this because I said, am I here to destroy this boy or to inspire him? Or to tell him about how difficult my life was? Put that aside, I said to myself, and do what he wrote. And then I'll find out myself. It's like jabbering. You're going to jabber, and you're going to find out after you said it what you did, right? In other words, he's not a great interpreter of anything, right? I did not, as a character, I didn't represent anything. I only represented a life that I had to go through and tell somebody about, because I recognized the great part about it was that Stephen told me that this was the recognizable part of the character in this movie would be that he causes him in some way to become a director, which is that's a big order.
It's a big calling.
It's a big order, and not to know what to play, to do that. You know what I mean? It's like saying you're going to play Superman, you see, but you're not going to fly, and you're not going to have any power whatsoever. But you're going to play Superman. Okay, let's try that. You know. So it came that okay, if he's foreign, I'll have a lot of reasons for doing what I do, and you won't understand it only because you weren't. Nobody will be at that generation. Okay, and I was hoping that the guy I played it with was going to be very, kind of kind to me, because he's going to realize, no, I'm not here to hurt you as an actor.
Well, you see the love. You see the love.
That's a tough thing to do. You do a scene like that with Gabriel, and I never met him. Mm-hmm. And all I can think of was he's going to say, what the fuck are you doing to me? You know, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? That's all I could get. And I thought, oh, that's successful.
Well, Uncle Boris was a very intimidating presence in our lives. For instance, frequently as we saw him, and I only met him twice, he scared everybody in the family because he worked for Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey Circus, and he was a lion tamer, and he had a crazy career. You know, all my family except for one grandparent, all my grandparents are from Ukraine, and then my grandmother on my mother's side, who was born in this country in Cincinnati, her mother was from Ukraine. So I grew up with accents, and I grew up with Russian and Yiddish and English being spoken in the house, and but whenever we talked about Uncle Boris, he was so much bigger than any of the personalities. As a matter of fact, my mom had the biggest personality of anybody in the family, and he really dwarfed her personality, and she was terrified of him because he scared her mother so much. So I just want one quick story about Judd. Judd does have a real 360 awareness. Judd pulled me aside and said, "Would you be offended if I made a suggestion?" And I said, "No, of course. What is it?" He said, "When I listen to Mitzi playing the piano, can you put the camera outside in the hallway shooting in, and then I'll be at the door and I'll open the door and you can get that shot from that side?" And I said, "Is that the shot you want me to shoot you on?" And he said, "Yeah, can you just put the camera out in the hallway?" And so I started taking direction from this guy.
I talked him into it.
That is amazing.
I'll also add that last night I was sitting right in front of him, and he got exit applause when he gets in the cab to drive away. So I reached back and I squeezed Judd's knee, and he immediately leans forward and says, there was that moment when I hugged Mitzi. He cut that. Why did he cut that? While people were still applauding his exit, it was like, there you go.
Still giving direction.
Don't listen to that. You must have had a really good reason. I thought it was one of the best scenes I ever did in the whole goddamn movie.
We're gonna have to just trust Stephen on this
way,
one, I think.
must say, you did not do what you did not do what you actually wrote. Here's what I read. At the end of the movie, we hear Steven Spielberg himself say, "Cut."
Yes, that was in the first cut, the second cut, and the third cut. And then I absolutely was not ready to knock down that wall. I did not want to knock the fourth wall down, so I cut myself out of the movie. It was a good choice. It was the right choice.
Stephen, I want to ask you about just the joy of movie making that we see in the Fabelmans. We've seen, of course, in your career, you do just about everything that movies can do, but we see little Sammy discovering the technique, the effects, the illusions that create that emotional reaction from audiences. And it's really a wonderful thing to see what might have gone into creating the young Steven Spielberg as a filmmaker. Can you talk about those moments and recreating those 8mm films, which is really such one of the pleasures of the film?
I worked really, really hard to make sure that all of the recreation of the 8mm I shot as a kid was better than the 8mm I shot as a kid. The angles were better. I was presaging a little bit of Private Ryan, so I had the camera low on the ground when the kids were blowing themselves up by stepping on that seesaw to throw the dirt in the air. I just tried to make it look better than, because I've seen those films. You know, when I made Private Ryan, I actually showed Escape to Nowhere, the little thing a little bit. I showed it to the entire cast around a monitor, and I showed it to them when we were shooting the Omaha Beach scene, like I think the third day of shooting in Ireland, and they all gathered around the monitor, and I wanted to show them this old movie I made when I was like 16 years old. And I think to an actor, they thought, "What are we doing in Ireland with this guy? It can't look like that. You know, why is he showing this to us?" But no, it was joyful being able to recreate those films, and I shot a lot of films when I was a kid, 8mm, and it was unique in those days. Not a lot of people were going out and shooting 8mm, and you know it was physical. It was a craft. You know, there were no Pro Tools, so you had to sit there with a butt splicer, and then you had to scrape the emulsion off the film in order to get a seal. So when you put glue on it, you literally glued the film together, and I miss it. I mean, I must say I miss it. I was the last person to cut on film in Hollywood. Very last person to really have a chem with the film on the spools going through the gate, and And I miss the evolution. And the digital age is fine. We all work within it and we all benefit from it. But I miss the smell of the celluloid and getting your hands and cutting yourself on the butt splicer. All those little crafted moments that we all grew up with. I'm just sad for the new generation that will never have a butt splicer or have to thread a camera and get the film properly in the gate, and it just was a wonderful thing to be able to have been exposed to that in my generation.
We have some questions from journalists as well now. I want to start with this one. What did Mr. Spielberg feel able to share with audiences this time, which he perhaps hasn't in any of his previous amazing work?
Well, just that I've been I've been very sad in my life at times. I've been, all of us have in our family. Divorce is something that traumatizes you, and I set out to tell the story of my mom and dad's divorce when I made E.T., and I had written some pages about the divorce, and then I got carried away because putting something between me and reality. So I put an alien between me and the reality of the divorce, and kind of punted that. I was chasing the squirrel a bit there. I just wanted to tell a story that was completely, honest to my recollections. I'm not saying that all my recollections are 100% accurate, but as best as I could recollect, I wanted to tell a story that most reflected my experience growing up with my sisters who are here, and their experiences growing up with me and my mom and dad and Uncle Benny, and also because COVID, where none of us were working and we were all basically at home, and my job directing is social. Writing. All my writer friends kept working during COVID, and because that's their truth, and mine is to be with people and to interface with people. And suddenly, thank God, a lot of my kids came home. We all lived under the same roof, but we were all living together under the same roof. And that the other thing about what I do was non-existent for me. And I just remember as the death tolls mounted, and we kept watching the reports of what was happening throughout the country and the world, I kept thinking, well, what is this going to mean for humanity? How far is this pandemic going to actually take us? And I kept thinking, well, if I'm going to tell a story that I've always wanted to tell about, a coming of age in this very unique family with a very unique mother and father, this may be the best time, with all the time I had on my hands, to sit with Tony and decide to write this on Zoom together, because I didn't know where this was going, and I thought, this is something I got to get out of me now. And I was also of an age where, before any of the vaccines, I was in that vulnerable, in my early 70s then.
We're almost out of time. The last question from a journalist I want to end with is, Stephen, I'll start with you, because John Ford figures so prominently in the film and so beautifully. But the question is, what's one movie or movie maker that made you really fall in love with movies? I presume for you it was John Ford.
Well, it was actually Walt Disney, because you have to understand that the filmmaker, the first movie I fell in love with movies was Disney, because that was the only exposure I had after Cecil B. DeMille. The first movie I ever saw was The Greatest Show on Earth, as depicted. But then all the other films after that, because my parents were, I was really traumatized by that movie with the train wreck. I mean, I recreated the train wreck just the way Sammy does on 8mm film, because I had to look at that over and over again to get it out of my system. So I was only allowed for a while to see Disney films, and so that was probably the first filmmaker that I was tremendous. And of course, it's well known how much I love John Ford, and I'm not going to say too much about what is absolutely authentic and what is a little bit, invented based on an authentic recollection. But I can say that the John Ford scene happened to me word for word, nothing more, nothing less. That was it. That was it.
Thank you. All right, let's quickly go across the stage here. Tony, I'll start with you. One movie or movie maker who made you fall in love with film?
Steven Spielberg. I don't know.
You can't all say Steven Spielberg.
I know. But, and absolutely. I mean, Mike Nichols. It's hard to say when this is the worst question to ask somebody like me, because I can't make lists. I will say that from Jaws, starting with Jaws on, I always felt like I had this, at the end of the first part of Angels in America, the last line is very Steven Spielberg. I mean, that was from the beginning. I felt like this is somebody who had a sensibility that was sort of defining an era, that it was understanding an era. There was the Gestalt was in those, the Spielberg look up. I was a medieval studies major at Columbia, and I thought a lot about the millennium arriving, and this was a guy who was making movies that was, and I felt really about that, and that had these incredibly complicated layers going on, as well as being just spectacular, not just, but as well as being spectacular popular entertainment. So I feel like I was in dialogue with him for a long time before we actually met.
Fair. Okay. One filmmaker or film, Judd?
It's a difficult question because the only thing that I can think of is what my responsibility was in a film that a director that necessarily gave me that made the film worthwhile to him, and it was Robert Redford in Ordinary People, only because he is an actor and was not the director. It was his first one, and when we got together, there was a kind of an understanding that I understood what exactly from an actor what was necessary to do the part that I had to do, not from the director. So, in other words, it was like trying to get the feelings of the person who was going to direct this movie for the reason that he wanted to do it. And one of the reasons was he had one of his kids was in therapy, and he never ever thought that it was done well. And he said to me, one thing I just want to tell you is, you will hug this kid in the movie. And I said, Robert, they're going to kill you for it. The whole industry is just going to say, they don't do that. He said, I know, but we're going to do it.
And instead, he won Best Picture. So
yeah,
not too shabby.
Yeah. And amazingly, that I thought it's an obligation.
Okay.
As an actor, if you're obligated to something, make sure that the obligation is really, truly worthwhile. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you. Gabriel, one film or filmmaker?
I can't really answer that because I grew up around DVDs and going to the movies before I knew what it was, and I knew I wanted to make movies before I knew I wanted to be in them, and so there's just so much. I really can't answer that, and just growing up with a mountain of DVDs in your house, watching something new all the time, it's hard to keep track.
All right, okay. Paul, Seth, anyone?
Yeah, it's such a tough question. I mean, it's like these accumulative phases. So like from Little Mermaid to Ace Ventura to then sort of
Where do
in
you
high
go
school.
from Ace Ventura?
Nowhere.
Well, then the late '90s when I was in high school, there was this incredible, and I think within the same year you might have had Saving Private Ryan and Thin Red Line. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, just two mind-blowing films, right? And then, and I think that started to. But for me as an actor, the theater was the first entry point because when I was a kid, like Arnold Schwarzenegger was movies to me. And I was not Arnold, so I thought I was going to be a theater actor, until I did my first film, and that went to Sundance, and that kind of opened the door for me at 16 to a world of film that I didn't know about, and then started to seek out.
Thank you. And Seth?
I mean, I made I have a partner named Evan who's my writing and producing and directing partner, and we grew up together, and we had a camcorder, and we would make movies, not nearly as good as Steven's, when we were young. And the first movie we made, we were obsessed with Star Wars, and we were obsessed with Spaceballs, and so we made a spoof of Spaceballs, which
Already a spoof.
comedically, it does not work. You cannot spoof a spoof. That's what we learned. It was we started at a very meta place, I think. But I think, honestly, Star Wars was one of those movies that really made a huge impact on me. Weirdly, the third Indiana Jones film, I think, was the one that came out when I was young, and I actually saw in theaters, and truly blew my mind, and I became obsessed with those types of films, and and honestly, Quentin Tarantino, someone I really grew up loving, but Harold Ramis is probably the one person who, when you're like a big, deep-voiced Jewish guy, he was the only person I could look at. He wrote and directed and acted, and I was like, he is an indicator I could succeed in this business.
All right.
So yeah, Harold was a great man.
Thank you. We're out of time. Thank you so much for being here. Please join me in
Thank you.
thanking
Thank
Seth
you.
Rogen,
Thank
Paul
you.
Dano, Gabriel LaBelle, Judd Hirsch, producer, screenwriter Tony Kushner, and Steven Spielberg.